Here you go. Started.
Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and just dive into the folder structure and naming conventions. As kind of caveated before, you know, we have region input, we have all these other things going on with regional input, contractor input, kind of throughout this past year, but not only this past year, even previously. And I know a few of you had worked on folder structure file naming prior to a lot of this. So that was also taken into account. And some of those folks that helped develop that have also seen this. So we've really made sure that as we develop this folder structure and naming conventions, that I used the term back in the future when we did some of our trainings, and it was because what we're doing is we're providing that folder structure more closely knit to what CDOT has been used to over the past however many decades. And it's a hybrid between that and somewhat of what Bentley has done, but I'm sure folks have heard of ISO 19650. If you haven't, what that is that's more of a universal file naming. What that provides is that file naming provides data transfer more consistent and repeatable and easy for users across the board. So whether it's CDOT, PennDOT, Arizona DOT, Montana, whoever it is, that provides more of a consistent naming across the board for people. So if they want to look at a traffic model or a traffic file, it's easy for them to get to because that same nomenclature is across the board, or it's in that same location of an identifier. So we've morphed everything together, taken that into account, and we'll go through those things and talk about those things and why the file name is why it is. But it also is more easy to use. It probably makes a little bit more sense than the one that we've had previously on what those numbers and letters mean and how they work with each other. So starting off though, really with the folder structure, again, this is derived from years in process and working with folks not only through this manual process, but also regions outside getting input, and also the development that CDOT had worked on prior to this too. So hopefully we've been able to capture, for the most part, I mean, it's definitely not going to make everybody completely happy, but I think it's a lot better than what you have now. And it gives a little bit more direction on where things end up being. So with that said, we will jump into the folder structure. And as you can see, this is the pre-construction folder. We didn't do anything with the project development folder. We didn't do anything with the construction folder, project standards. Those folders are as is. We concentrated on the pre-construction folder. So hold on.
Because CDOT has gone through the construction and update the construction, that's why probably those questions.
Yeah.
Is that true, Laura?
Well, my comment was back when we were talking about doing digital delivery only. That's an old comment.
And right now, I think it's just kind of moving that direction, Laurel. So I think it's not just design or just construction. It's not that that's what we're doing like right now. It's still that hybrid state of moving into that direction. So it's a matter of coming along, and depending on projects, depending on what the project is, and how that's being delivered through the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you could see the folder structure will have the digital and the plan set and spec. As we move forward on qualified project, we'll have only the digital deliverable and the spec. So we're going toward that implementation, but right now nothing's changed. But we're stepping into digital design model, adding that to the plan and spec, and then removing the spec in the future on qualified projects.
Well, and we wouldn't remove the spec.
No, not
as
the
a-
spec,
Yeah.
the plan.
or even in, as we were talking before, and I don't know who all was on here as well. So digital deliverables, there's not really, it's not that you're going to completely get rid of PDFs or you're going to completely get rid of plans, because there's still always reference points of different
Yep.
things that need to happen. It just depends on what that format is of what's being used. And again, to your point, Laurel, it depends also on what that project is, what's discussed at the beginning of that project and how that's planned to be delivered, and what contractors are available to propose on bidding on those projects, so that we're not singling out or eliminating other contractors that may not have that use yet.
Yeah, I mean, we would like to utilize digital design and construction. So if plan will be provided, that's fine, but move in this direction.
Does that help answer, Laurel?
Yeah, like I said, that was the whole comment.
Okay.
So, I didn't actually have a question.
Okay. Yeah, right. Thanks.
Mitchell, you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment. And this is back where we were at with the folder structure thing. And Sahar and Jeremy, you guys might need to correct me on this, but I've been able to request for brand new projects that we created that were given the old folder structure. I've been able to request that those get switched to the new one. So unless you guys aren't comfortable with that, broadly speaking, I think that's a possibility now. I
Yep.
don't know. I don't think are things getting issued now with the new structure?
Yeah,
I'm-
I don't know if you saw the announcement. It's been like over a month when sent an announcement that will be implemented, the new folder structure for the pre-construction, and also there's some modification in the construction. So since the announcement, Mitch, if your project is using and you would like to move, and it's possibly to move, like you don't lose any data or there's no hectic, depend where you are in the design on the project phase, you can make a Mojo help ticket and they can update your project. But that should be like a mutual project team deciding, because it's a little bit different than the old one. So this decision is up to you, but all new project after the announcement is using the new template.
Yeah, thanks, Sahar. I think I'm talking about those kind of interim projects where we recently created them and maybe we don't have a lot of data in there that we're at risk of losing, but they were created before the switch happened. So I had a handful of those actually where I was able to just email Mojo and have them switch to the new structure on those new projects.
Perfect.
Relatively painlessly. I think you made a good point of like, should be a mutual project decision, especially if you're deep in design already. And then you need to make sure that you're not going to lose your data by switching to the new structure.
Yep.
And I don't know how to do that, but you guys probably do.
Well, if we always say, if you are like a FOR or something that, and you have a lot of data and stuff, don't change the version, don't upgrade, or don't switch just because you want to finish. You have a lot of data already, and there's a risk always of losing data. So
Yeah, I would just, what you did,
avoid
Mitch,
that.
sounds great. Minimal data, then yeah.
Yep.
One follow-up question on that, and this is the question. I have a project where I've done most of my work in project development because we haven't really been greenlit to do design. Well, since this is the pre-construction folder update, does the entire directory get converted over, or is it just that one pre-construction component that gets switched?
Well, usually they use a template with new structure. So
Probably everything.
probably everything. If it's empty, if not, they can manage to just replace pre-construction.
Okay, it sounds like that's a specific question for Mojo, probably, if they could
Yep,
just.
you
'cause
can.
my-
You can say, can you just like sometimes the O5 standard is just messed up and
Right.
we just replace it, not the
Yeah.
entire template, just the O5.
Yeah,
So
I've done that before.
exactly. So pre-construction, if you want to just say, just replace the pre-construction, they will.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. All right. So diving into this, and again, just chime in if questions, different things pop up. The very first one is just archive records. So at the end of the day, project's done, everything's been completed. That's where we would pull the files together in a zip file. And then that way you've got all of your contents together, and then that can be uploaded to OnBase. And then your design milestone submittals. So what that is what it says. Basically, every design milestone that you have, to be able to have a copy of that information, of that submittal, that's where those would go in these files or in these folders, is that design milestone submittal information. So that's really kind of just those top tier. And what this, it just goes in alphabetical order, except for quantities. I just realized that's not in alphabetical order in the subfolders, but all of the specialty groups and everybody, this goes in order. So you're going to see most of these folders for the specialty groups. And again, I think we have captured every specialty group within CDOT to make sure that you all have a place. You have somewhere to put your information. You have somewhere to maintain your information. You have somewhere that holds that information for you. So for instance, like environmental swamp, one of the things that we are doing, before I guess I get into that, with each specialty group, your main base files, your model files, those files that are being used for referencing, different things like that, your container files, model base files, your notes, your different things like that go along with that's in a CAD format, will reside in your main folder. So your like environmental swamp, your notes, your design models, for hydraulics, same thing, your storm system, basin delineation, your ponds, all those different things go under your main directory of your specialty group. That's for all of those folders. So as kind of going down, like environmental swamp, there's reports for your NEPA documents, forms, memos, different things like that. That's where all of these would go. Again, across the board for everyone, Redway, 463s, 59s, different things like that. That's going to go in for reports. Your sheets, self-explanatory. That's where all of your sheet files are going to go. Your really that's where everything goes in there. All of your sheets that are created for your plans, that's where those are going to reside based on your specialty group. So if I have initial, interim, final, environmental sheets, that's where those sheets are going to end up. Under hydraulics, I have my details, my storm system, my plan, my profiles, basin delineations, all those different things, those sheets all go in sheets. So every specialty group will have those folders, and most are going to have quantities. We do have under geotechnical and materials, you don't see quantities in there because those quantities are going to be based. So like on materials, if I have the pavement section, my roadway, that's where my quantities are going to be in my roadway. Borings, those types of things, we're not calculating quantities. We'll have that more informational. So reports, my geotech report, my pavement report, those types of things. I may have boring logs separate from others that I may have to just have boring log sheets. So that's where the sheets were designed. I think this is one of the feedback that I've gotten is the working folder for folks. I know a lot of people have been missing that. So that is one thing that definitely did come back for everyone. In every specialty group, you have a working folder. So that working folder is what it says. It's for your working documents. If you're doing things, items that you want to just kind of mess around with or you're playing with, you want to reference, just to have that folder and have that information in there. One of the things we'll get into as far as container files and things like that, we'll get into what those are here later. It's basically your nested files that go in, but a little bit more in depth. In your working folder that you have for a specialty group, I highly, highly recommend, based on uses of ORD, based on how data management needs to work within Bentley products, is I highly recommend creating a working container file. What that means is please develop a file, basically a blank file that references all the other specialty groups or whoever else you need to reference or whatever information you want to reference. Make that file, because you're going to be able to use that file to reference into other things at the end of the day and detach at the end of the day. So you're not detaching and attaching 20 different references. You can do it with one. So I'm just highly recommending developing a working container file for yourself as a user. And there's a way to do that with having the file naming in your initials. Jody.
So would that working container file be the main container file for everything? Or is that just one that other folks can reference in and out?
So the working file would be user dependent. So any working file Jody, a working file that you would want that would have information in there that you would use as you're designing and modeling moving forward. Stephen.
Yeah, I want to just pop in here real quick for that working file. Really critical. We never use that as an intelligent reference for anything, because the hope is, hey, I bring it in and I clear it out. So as we deliver that model, it's not cluttering that. So yep. We're going to use that as kind of your background information. But if I need an alignment, I'm going to have to explicitly bring that in so that stays connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're not talking about the project model for the project. It's just...
No, this is a working file for user dependent.
Exactly.
Or like what Stephen put it very well, background information.
Yep.
So that way I'm not having any dependent data ties across the board. This is just a working file so that I can bring other information and detach it at the end of the day. There's no data dependencies on it.
Nope.
So that is just one thing to keep in mind. As Stephen said, it probably the best way to put it is it's background information. So yeah. I would create that file and have that as a user, not as a group, but as a user.
Yeah, for those who used to work previously and take the training on Prime, we used to have a list, create a list and add what you want and just look at it. It's just for your own working environment, not to share, and it's not dependent like Steven said.
Yep.
There's Trina, she has two.
For FR add folders, are we duplicating files or using sets? Can you elaborate a little bit more what you mean, Trina? Sorry.
Problems we had years ago when we had this many files and folders is that people would, so if you had your specs, you would have your specs in your reports folder, and then people were duplicating that and then putting it in the FIR, and then duplicating that and putting it in to the ad. And then we had this big mess of nobody knew anymore which files were supposed to be updated, which one was the right one. And so with the current project-wise folder system we have, that you can keep your current file in one spot, and then you would use your data set to have it to where people could access in a central location, in your FOR or in your FIR, but your original file, there's still only one of them and it's in only one place.
Yeah, we used to tell everyone not to copy. Like, for example, if I'm working on a survey, I don't copy the survey file. I go reference the survey from the survey folder. And this one of the mistake people do is just copy file from other specialty group and move them to their folder and create that. And this is not a good practice.
I had one RE that came to me and said, figure this out, Trina, this needs to stop, because there was so much confusion and duplicate files everywhere.
Yep, that's bad practice. I think our training will actually guide you through how to use it in the future. Future training will give you more direction on how to use and why it's not recommended to copy file from specialty group and put it in your folder and just reference that and all that good stuff.
I'd also mention there's no need to copy things like specs, right?
Yep.
If you have an FIR level spec book, it goes in the FIR folder. If you have an
Agree.
FOR level spec book, it goes in the FOR folder.
Agree.
Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. The theory for the archive, so active files are always active. So there's going to be a spec file, right?
Sure.
And as we get to different deliverables or different milestones, we will make essentially a snapshot of that, and that gets stored for posterity, right, up here. But at any point in the process, the file for whatever is only in one place and is current.
Yep, that's
Correct.
the intent. Right
Correct.
on.
Which should take care of both what Trina's talking about. Hey, I'm duplicating this. No, there is one file and it is current. If you need to know what it was at a previous point, we've archived at those milestones.
Yep.
As well as the question of, where am I looking for that current version? There is one version. It's
Right.
current.
Right.
There is a tendency for people who's working on a project to create subfolder and to store their own, and they reference their own to create their own deliverable, and that should all be eliminated.
Leighton?
Yeah, so I noticed if you scroll up a little bit, you've got under that the design milestones middle folder, you've got PSET files in there. The print organizer like that also is taking a snapshot. It's pulling whatever the files are currently. So is the intention that we would have, one set of plan sheets for FIR and then totally recreate everything for the next design step? I'm just wondering why we would want to have the PSET files in something that's supposed to be static when the PSET files are pulling from whatever the most current file version is.
So again, these are copies of, so like Stephen was saying, the original, so the PSET files, those original files stay within the project.
Okay.
A snapshot in time. So think of this as a snapshot in time of your submittal.
Okay.
So that's what this folder is for. It's a snapshot in time.
Yep.
So I know that this is one thing that's still kind of being worked through with OIT as well, of that management, that data management. But what this provides is this provides that snapshot in time of, oh, hey, we had a FIR set, plan set that I printed these things with. Well, as the project has evolved and moved forward to those next milestones, that piece that's been updated with whatever other files have been included. So if I need to go reproduce something from an FIR set for whatever reason, I can go do that.
Yep.
But you won't be able to reproduce what's in the FIR set because unless you're also taking an archive copy of the so you are taking an archive copy
Yeah.
of plan sheets and design models, and so this is everything, whole project.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and
Ma-
like Jeremy said, we're working through that still.
Because it's a lot of data.
It's a lot of data, so yeah.
Well, it's a lot of data, and the way ProjectWise manages information, when you copy the file, I'm still looking back to the old source
Exactly.
for reference.
Exactly.
So the workflow and what's taking the time to work through that is how do I bring that over and make sure that my FOR roadway plan points to my FOR aligned, because we don't rename all of the files down below. We make a copy. So you got to do some reference scanning and updating all of that.
Yep. Mitchell?
2 points, I think, is the first one is we tried to give everything only one place to live in this new structure. So it doesn't really make sense to copy things around too much outside of just archiving. And then I think, well, we're still, like you guys said, we're still working through what it means to snapshot and archive the CAD components, the digital components, the design milestone submittals, at least in the near term, like those are for the actual deliverables themselves. So that's PDF sets at this point. And there's the problem of like, how do we snapshot an FIR CAD model and save that somewhere so that I don't know, I can't think of a situation where I've needed to like go back and where I've needed that snapshot of a FIR CAD model or an FOR CAD model. We tend to just keep things updated. I guess if you need to revert due to massive scope change to an earlier one, that might make sense. But
yeah,
I think yeah, especially with that design milestone submittal, like it's not at this point, I don't think we're prepared to just save CAD snapshots in there. We don't know what that looks like, right? So it's right. Simply PDFs, documents, reports, stuff like that.
Yep.
And it has one home.
Yeah. And that's the goal, Mitch, is to have the one home. So, like that's good feedback from everybody of, maybe that design milestone submittal, I think, needs to be evaluated a little bit more and kind of what that is moving forward. And I know that there's been some posts on versioning and different things, and yeah, that's definitely an option too, of just the versioning and some of those elements.
With version, the complication comes in version is record specific, right? So I can create versions of my alignment file as I go through revisions, but the corridor that's dependent upon that alignment, if I want an aligned reality, I actually have to have both.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, still version is a working reality. Hey, I did something here. I need to go back to it. I corrupted my file. I need to go back to it. So we'll still version, but versions are individual record realities. And what this is trying to do is large scale snapshots so that I can go back. If I want to go back to a corridor file from a specific point in time, that corridor file is only accurate if I have an alignment and other inputs from that point in time.
Yeah.
Well, I guess like what's changing between an FIR and an FOR with the alignment? If the alignment changes meaningfully and then that propagates a series of changes between all of those different design deliverables, then saving the change at the alignment level with a new version is likely the most logical place to make that change, because everything else is changing as a dependency. So I guess, are we creating more work for ourselves by creating a versioning scheme that is going to be, to put it bluntly, haphazardly, if at all, implemented?
So I think, knowing what you're saying, Chris, I think I heard you right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I think there probably is some, I think, thought on is this going to be used? the whole purpose again for this, and I don't want to just get stuck on this design milestone submittal. It's really just to create a snapshot in time, and it's really kind of just to back when we did submittals with other elements where we would, when we had CDs, right, or DVDs, we would have a snapshot in time where we would burn that point, that milestone deliverable onto that DVD, and we had that information. So what it is trying to keep that backup information. If the group believes that, maybe that snapshot in time is not needed, and if for some reason you need to go back to something and get a backup from OIT because of that, maybe that's the route to go. But I think that is definitely a discussion that needs to be had internally with CDOT on what you all would like to see. Again, it's not me, Jeremy at HDR, making the decision for CDOT. This is your guys' deal. It's not me doing it. So
yeah, so let me explain a little bit, maybe, or add a little bit on Jeremy for that folder when we did design milestone submittal. This all depend on the scope, what you're doing, how intricate the design is, and what type of project you are doing and method of delivery. That can actually benefit a lot if you have a record at every milestone of the project, of everything been worked on. That include the design record, CAD design models, and everything. Like Jeremy said, also there's an instant when it's really needed, when there's more than a specialty, like there's a collaboration based on the project scope, there's more than one consultant and stuff. You can go back to that. If something got corrupted, go back to that and continue. So this is for your benefit. The backup of data is for your benefit more than it's a requirement, and should be implemented at any scope or any kind of project you're doing. This is there just to outline the benefit, and it's very beneficial when you need it. Cindy said, why would you keep all design? If it's a submittal, and if there's a collaboration or anything went during the project, you have a record snapshot of all that information created up to that date.
Can I just say that I think most of us agree with Cindy, but there's nothing in this folder file structure that would preclude you from creating that snapshot.
Yep.
Should you want to, right?
Yep. If you want
So
to.
the flexibility is there. Most of us don't need it.
Here you go. Flexibility is there. If needed. There's sometimes really you benefit a lot from doing that. Depend on the project, as I say, how intricate the design, what is the scope of that project. If needed, this is the place for it.
Real quick, one of the complications in moving the industry to digital delivery, it has unfortunately been the question of risk. And when you're delivering a PDF and all you're communicating is in paper form, the PDF is sufficient to answer the question of, what did I say back here? When you're delivering a digital document where the files themselves are that, there is a portion of the question here that is about, where can I identify that I did the steps necessary to deliver the proper product? So that's a portion of it. So it's back to the question, is it more work? It is different work, yes. But as the industry moves into the question of risk, it's something you're going to probably need to have at some point. Not on every project, but on the occasional one. So the process needs to be in place.
Yep, that's what we said.
And I think Mitch put it best. The flexibility is there for the need.
Yep.
So when we move forward on it. So I'm going to move ahead on. So media still that still exists, but we've kind of identified it more so of KMZ files, web links, press releases, different things like that, that go in the media file itself. Any exhibits that you have for open house materials, public meetings, some of those items, your photos, presentations, all those things. So this area is really for that to be housed, is where that information would go. Todd, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, before we go too much further, and I apologize, good discussion, guys. A lot of good information there. But I think my burning question right now is we have all these different groups. We have this new file system. And my biggest issue is safeguards. For example, if I have a survey, I put it together and I give the final, my final drawings, and it goes up into Project Wise, wherever. Are my drawings safe? Is my field book safe? Can it be manipulated by somebody else? Because don't get me wrong, accidents happen. So, I mean, I don't need an engineer or anybody jumping in there and changing my information, and vice versa. I don't need to be in there changing other people's information.
Yep. That's very
So are there the safeguards there to say, okay, you're not a surveyor, you shouldn't be editing this. Okay, you're not an engineer, you're not a water quality specialist, so you can only just be viewing this other stuff.
I can check on the access. I think the access is set just like before. If you are the specialty group survey, you have read write and everyone else have read.
Yeah, because lately I learned I've been living under a rock, and things have changed in Project Wise to where these guys their stuff is getting edited intentionally or accidentally by engineers and other people. And so they're having to do safeguards against, and just, other surveyors having to do, to protect their information.
I am sorry to hear that. I think because the PM gives sometimes after the project, the PM should and ensure that I can check with Eduardo. That's a good question. It should be like in the past. Every specialty group has their own read write. Everyone else can have a read to it. But yeah, I'll check. But the PM sometimes give privileges, and that shouldn't happen. I'm gonna check with Eduardo on this.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Laurel?
I think the problem is when we went to the new Project Wise, you have to give people access to everything now. You can't just lock down the folders like it used to be. And so it's made it really challenging to be able to secure other disciplines folders like that.
Well, we're gonna have to check. Thank you for bringing Todd and Laura, bringing this to my attention. I thought we are following the same protocol, but if I'm hearing something wrong, we have to correct that. Trina? Same thing, Trina?
Now, my question is, and this goes back because Sahar, I was part of the Project Wise folders for years.
Yep.
And back 9 years ago, we discovered that we had this many breakouts.
Yep.
And almost all of all the folders weren't getting used. And that's part of the reason. I'm not saying that, it didn't need improvement, but that's because most of the folders sat there empty. That's why we went to a more condensed folder system. So is there a plan to look at this again in 3 years to see which of these folders are actually being used? Or are we planning on just going with this and having a bunch of empty folders?
That's a very good question. This is a standard template folder structure that will be implemented on every project. Now, depend on the scope of that project. If there's no hydraulic involved, there's no bridge involved, you can make the request and say, remove the hydraulic and remove the bridge, remove whatever. So it can be tailored that way to your project specific need. But that is a standard template that's include everything, all specialty group, and it can be altered as needed based on the project scope. And that is what you guys decide. I don't know what, and most likely if you put the request, that's why we go back to SAP. We say, okay, in SAP, if you check out what you need and say, create that project, I think we will have in the past on-prem, we used to have a few folder template for ITS by themselves. They have template. If it's only project ITS, but that information has to be provided in SAP before you check the box, create it in a project-wise. So project-wise can tell which template to use. But in general, if this is, sometimes you can't have all this information at that time when the created for project-wise, you can put a module help ticket and say, I don't have anything in my project for bridge or whatever it is, specialty group, and they can delete those subfolders. They can make it tailored to your project specific. Does that help? Trina?
Yeah, I got a question here.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we're delivering this file information or survey files or GPS files or terrain files and that sort of thing, how do we contain this information so it doesn't get leaked out outside of CDOT or out to the public? I'm speaking from a liability perspective.
Okay, so
I don't want. Yeah, I mean, it's fine for these kinds of files to be used internally, but I don't want the average person getting hold of these data files.
I agree. There is a.
So what are we going to do to safeguard our work product?
First of all, project-wise is not a public facing. That's first of all. Anything it goes to project-wise here, that's not a public facing. No one can see it. Only people who works, those outside entity and consultant work on the project and have a contract with CDOT to work on the project can have access. It's not a public facing project-wise. And when you submit those or publish those for through like advertisement and stuff, this is not included. I'm sure you're not including that. And if someone asks for it, they have to go through a record, Open Record Act, and see if they qualify and how much qualify to see information. So I'm not sure. Does that answer, Eric? I'm not sure why would the public see that.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying somebody could say, hey, we want a core request and all the survey files for this project.
Yeah, that they have to go through
they could do that. And
nope, they have to go through public Open Record Act. They have to go through. They can't just, if I'm a PM and somebody outside from the public told me, that's breaking CDOT law. You have to go through Open Record Act to provide this information.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sahar. What I'm talking about is once what's going to happen on the end, once they get the request on somebody performs a core request within CDOT, will they go into ProjectWise and grab that information and deliver it to that person?
Nope.
And what's going to stop them from doing that? Or is there a CDOT policy in place to say, no, we cannot deliver this type of work product?
Yep, you can decide whether you should be notified. First of all, you should be notified.
I'm going to table this for now just so we can move
Yeah.
on and get the rest of the information. But I think that, I mean, and not to cut you off either, Eric, it's more
No, it's okay.
that information. I think that's probably a different form, a different level of control, like document control and that type of stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, but
All right.
so definitely great questions, for sure. I wish we had more time to answer them, but
Okay. Thanks.
but yeah, so really just kind of wanting to move on these. One of the things that we did try and provide, and I think Sarah's going to look into it too. And Trina, definitely to your point on the folders and empty folders, what we tried to do is provide something in where I think Mitch said it best, a flexible folder structure that applies to all specialty groups, that gives you the opportunity to utilize your information and your data in your specialty group. And it's not that everyone would be used. And again, it would be using the folders and having those conversations and that communication from that beginning of the project. What is the project? What's the purpose and need of the project? What are we doing? What are we delivering? What specialty groups are involved? What does that folder structure need to have in it based on this template?
We also only have one layer of subfolders, which I think will help a lot with a lot of these empty and ghost folders. In the old system, the one before the one we have in ProjectWise now, a lot of those ghost folders were the triple or the second and third tier subfolders that just never got used. So on top of the ability of having Mojo go in and delete it unused folders, so, we lost a lot of brain cells trying to find that happy medium on all this. So there's not a single set or folder structure that's going to make everybody happy, but this one gives decent flexibility and a limited set of folders. It is obviously more than what's out there right now.
Yeah, well put. Jody.
Will this replace that old Excel spreadsheet of where the files go, what folder they're supposed to go into, and will that be removed from ProjectWise? Because it kind of needs to be.
Yes,
that old Excel file's out of date.
Yeah, this will be where files go and what the folder structure is. We tried to make it as condensed as possible and easy to use as possible for that. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm going to move on to I'm going to move on to file naming here. So I'm going to keep it kind of high level because I know we're getting close to time on some things, but the reason for the file names and the identification. So again, it's very similar to what you've already had, what you've been used to, and there's reasons for that. A lot of the reasons for that, as you can see, a lot of these things in here. It's again, being consistent, reliable information, because each state highway is its own state highway. Each, everything's kind of got its own thing. So we can't call it all different names. We have to have some kind of consistent naming convention to make it easier for down use consumption, and also maintaining, filtering, being able to find things that make it much easier data management of the files. So once we get into this, so we'll kind of go through it and I'll walk through it, and then we can have questions there. As you can see on here, use of logical names. So logical names kind of went away. We're really trying to, I don't know how many people use them now. It is something that is very much of importance, especially as it moves into Bentley Infrastructure Cloud. Logical names are those names of, if I have a state highway, I can say what it is. If I have a street, if I have a drainage file, if I have something that I need to name that makes it easier for me to understand what it is versus a sequencing of numbers and letters, that's what this provides. The logical name will be used in referencing. So when you reference something, for instance, if I reference a drainage container file, it's going to say drainage container file for that logical name and for that description. That's what logical name is for. There will be how-tos on how that works. It's also in this manual on what that logical name is and what that looks like. So as I attach a reference file, that logical name goes in here. For instance, this one was 6th Street. So in order to identify what that really is, it's 6th Street corridor versus just the name of roadway COR 6, which you can pretty much get from that. But now I've got a logical name. That also helps me in filtering as you move forward into Bentley Infrastructure Cloud, more cloud-based, into IFC, into more digital assets. So this is what helps with that. So for the file naming, this doesn't change. This has been around forever. This is what we've used. So your project number, sub-account number. Very rarely, sometimes you may not have a project number. So what's been allocated for that is it's still a 5-digit, maybe it's not a number, but maybe it's 5 digits of letters of what fit that project in case there is not a sub-account project code. So that will be the first part of the naming convention. The second part is the originator. So did CDOT do it? Are you working on a blended team? Did a consultant do it? Did a sub-consultant do it? Is there a vendor file? Who is the owner of that file? That's what that second part is. The third part is the discipline specialty codes. So all of the specialty groups have their own code that goes along, so which is the third identifier in there. So what that is that originator code is that 3-letter abbreviation. And what's important is all of these are designated of either 5 letters, 3, or 4. And that's important at the end of the day for data transfer, data management, filtering, finding information. So after that part of your specialty code is a functional breakdown code. What kind of file is it? Is it a container file? Is it an MOT file? Is it a sheet file? Is it a terrain file? What kind of file is it? That's what this functional breakdown code is about. Again, 3 letters. The example descriptor codes, again, am I working on a segment or removal? What state highway is it? Is it a street? What is that? So that's that example descriptor code. Then I have example number codes for my numbering of my sheets, of my versions and how many sheets I have. I know there's 4 digits. Rarely are there plans that have that, but sometimes there are, so we need to account for that. What it ends up being is in that example file name, I now have a 5-digit number, my originator, my discipline specialty group number, functional breakdown, my descriptor, and if a sheet, that number. The examples are here as below. So you can see what that file name would look like and what that description and logical name. So again, your description in project wise, and then your logical name should match. Those need to match. Those need to be the same thing. So that way in the description, if I'm looking on project wise for a specific folder, I can do that. I can also filter out if I want to just have container files, I can filter out just CNR. What this provides is it provides a level that makes it easy for people to filter, use, find, transfer data information. Trina.
The logical name, are we going to be able to see that in ORD when we're
Yes.
referencing in files?
Yes. So let me go back up here real quick. So once you reference in your file and you give it that logical name will reside in your reference file.
Yep.
And then same thing from like Bentley Infrastructure Cloud, what it'll see and it'll let you filter through. So you're not having to go back and figure out, okay, what's my descriptor? What's my discipline, specialty? I can go straight to that logical name and I can filter through what that name is.
So is the logical name, is that something that's directly tied to the file, or is that something you have to recreate every time you reference it in?
Right now, you give it that name, you give it that description and logical name of the same. That is something that will be worked on in the next, as we're working forward towards other elements, is actually getting to have, okay, if it has a specific descriptor, maybe there's something you put in there, but it is going to be pretty difficult, Leighton, to get away from project to project, because you're going to have different names of different things. And that's why this logical and description name is so important, of having it the same per project.
Okay, so that's where we need to, every time we reference it in, we need to add in the logical name.
Yes.
Yes, yes, that's by the user, and we'll cover it in the training, I think, in the future training.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. So going through the file naming, so hopefully, and again, I know we're not going to make everyone happy, but what we tried to do is really, this matches with, it's called ISO 19650, which is, that's a global naming convention. Most states are using that, or so a lot of states, Arizona, PennDOT, Oklahoma, you name it, quite a few states are using that same nomenclature. Reasons for that, for the ISO 19650. Now we've got a consistent naming convention across the nation. We've got consistent information that can be transferred across. So if I'm looking for different things and someone from somewhere else is working on something, because it does happen quite a bit where you do have other people from other states working on projects from CDOT, or people from Colorado working on other projects in Minnesota. If that naming convention is similar, it makes it much easier to figure out what you're looking at and how to maneuver through your project.
Well, also getting information from other DOT, because you know exactly how to find it.
Exactly. The archiving process we talked about above, this just dives into a little bit more detail on how that works. So I know we've got like 25 minutes left, and I don't think we're going to get through everything, unfortunately, but are there any other questions on the file naming folder structure? And I know there will be as you guys start using it. James.
Yeah, thank you. I had a quick question about the permissions on the specialty folders. Is that going to default to allow the specialties to have privileges, or is it going to be set by the project manager still?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to talk to the project wise admin team, see how we can improve it, and if the PM for some reason wanted to have read write to for someone on the team to for specific reason, you can. We'll see what the options are.
Okay, so we're still figuring that part out.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, James, didn't mean to cut you out. So one thing to maybe, and I don't know, Sahar, hopefully I'm not overstepping, but I think one of the things that would benefit that, because I'm hearing a lot of like security type of stuff, I think it would be good for you all, again, as this being your guys's how you work, your interface, getting that information to Sahar on what you would like to see, so that we can get an overall from the group. Okay, this is kind of the consensus of what we're seeing, of what people would like to see and how that needs to operate. I think that would help out Sahar quite a bit on being able to go forward with OIT and talking with ProjectWise and how that's handled.
Yeah.
Sorry. Do you agree?
Yeah. As always, your feedback, guys, and what you tell me work best for you, so we can recommend to and work with OIT on.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. Brian?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment about what James looks like Greg's talking about too. Is as a survey department, I would like to see access to those folders. I mean, we get locked out of our own folders, and we should be able to have access to those.
Agreed.
Yep, agree. Is there something in the chat?
Yeah, and Laurel makes a good point, and and I've heard from Sahar from a few people internally from CDOT of having the PM set those privileges, and I saw earlier about maybe a project-wise admin for projects and different things, and I think that's where that needs to be set up and be something that needs to be worked through. Of maybe it's not the PM's responsibility, but maybe that becomes like the project model manager or whoever's working on that, of how that's delegated and how that's handled. That there needs to be some kind of hierarchy of what those security measures are, and getting people the right access to what they need to have.
Well, believe it or not, in the previous, like on-prem, when the template, we have the standard template, each folder, like let's say survey set to see the survey read right and everybody right. That comes with the template. It's set with the template. It's not up to or relying on a PM to do that. Yeah, it's set that way. So I want to go back and see what the best way, and then share it with you guys and see if, I know you want to have some PM privileges, which it should, but also I want to see if the template's set that way to allow confidential documents, especially right away and survey, to be locked down only for seen by all the other specialty group, just read right for you guys.
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard from others, Sahar, is it's not set up at the beginning that the PMs usually have to go into privileges. So
yeah, that's really bad. To me, it's not right, because oftentimes right away, even right away has a confidential for a few people to see some stuff.
Right.
Like when it comes, like how is that even right?
Yeah. So, and that kind of gets into the file and data management and different things too, of having those right security measures. So, these questions, very valid, definitely need to address. And I think that's part of the things that Sahar will work on, we'll help with, having a foundation that helps you all out and gets there. So, wanted to move on here to file and data management. So again, security being one of those. Documentation. Again, we talked about file naming. We talked about versioning, collaboration. And I'm going to say collaboration, communication. That's going to be the best thing through this whole process of any project, is just really having that communication all the way through. I do want to touch on file federation and container files. File federation, and I'm just going to scroll down to the example. Federating data, federating files. For instance, this example of like roadway. So I have main lines, I have different corridors, I have side roads, I have different corridors, frontage roads, interchanges, ramps, whatever that may be. That information, that federated data that's one of the most important parts about digital design and delivery, is really federating that information and federating often. You don't want to have everything that you're doing and designing in one file. You want to separate those out. So if I want to have at the end of the day a roadway file that has that information, a geometry file that has information. I can pull that information. I can reference that information. That federated information, federated data stays with its own compartment. So main lines, that data is there. Side roads, that data is there. That's federated information, federated files. We have in here too what those rules are and those best practices of federating files and why. And a lot of that, it all boils back down to data, data, data. Back when VAI, we had a graphics component in the MicroStation. We had data components and inroads. Those were separate data from separate graphics. Now everything's together. So we really have to be cognizant and watch what we're doing and how we are managing that data in those files. Container files. So again, similar to federated. Container files, though, more so referencing my information, referencing different specialty groups, referencing that information. All of these specialty groups are going to have their own container files. Those container files are used for your production. That container file is to be used to reference for sheet production. It's not to be referenced if I am working on a roadway corridor model and I need to see the drainage. I do not reference the drainage container file because the drainage container file, as you see here as an example, would contain most of these files. That would duplicate a lot of the files that I have. So these container files are used for sheet production. There are only 2 container files. They're going to be used for cross-disciplinary reference. One of those being your roadway file, because your roadway file is a federated file of container or of corridors. Those corridor feature lines are brought across because that is your 3D model derivative. That should be used for your plan sheet, should be used for your design work. That is the only container file that'll be referenced besides your geometry file, because your geometry, again, will be federated geometries. You don't want all of your geometry in one file, especially like, let's say, an interchange, for an example. I would have a main line, a cross street, and ramps. I would have those ramps in a file, the main line and cross street in separate files. I can reference those into a container file because that's now federated data, but I can reference that as a whole if needed. So those are the only 2 files that would be referenced for cross-discipline, cross-specialty group referencing. These container files are mainly used for sheet production. So that way, when I have a sheet, I have a container file where I control my level symbology, my level and level controls itself of what's turned on and what's on, what's not on, and what attributes I'm using. Questions on federated and container files? Nothing?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're lucky.
Yes,
No
quick-
question.
One quick
Okay.
question. So the
Yeah.
container file, those are for each personal use. We're not creating a container file for use by roadway or somebody else.
No, that's incorrect. The roadway production container file is for roadway. That's
Yeah.
for your roadway sheet files. For traffic, you would have a traffic production container file. That traffic container file is for your traffic sheets. It's for those files. That's what those are for. Those are not user specific. The user specific would go back to having a working user container file.
Yeah, I think, Andy, you're referring to named boundary file.
No, I'm talking about, so say I have 5 separate bridge models,
Okay.
files. Am I expected to create a container file so roadway can attach one container file, or are they gonna do it all
Yeah,
on their own?
They would
What-
attach your bridge files as your bridge files. The container file for bridge, Andy, would just be that container file for the bridge sheet files.
Okay, So this is just for sheet production. It's primarily.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Sahar and Jeremy, I think we're going to have, the plan is to have training specifically on this concept, right?
Correct.
Yep.
You guys gonna have a lot of training, don't worry.
Yeah. There's elements of this that are not new, and then there's elements of this that are kind of new. You know?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like we've talked about this in general, we have not used it as a standard part of our standard training, and now we are moving to that, and we will you will receive training on all of this.
Yeah, and the one of the main, I mean, I guess I'll give one of the main reasons for container files is it gives a one location of being able to manipulate, operate, and set the file that you need for your sheet production, so that there's one location that is operated in and not a bunch of different areas.
And it will be used as a reference for the sheet. It will not be the main file to generate the sheets. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Your name boundary, you'll have a name boundary file that will be
You'll
used.
have a name boundary.
Yep.
You see all this good coming?
Yep.
Jeremy?
The files are created sheets for container files. Already, this is very confusing. Called the files were created sheets from container files. Yeah, so the container file, so they're already training from Bentley. I guess, yeah, I'm not familiar with.
No, what's happening, Jeremy, like Bentley, and during training and stuff, they say, you have your DGN file design and you go create in that DGN file, like you'll have 50 sheet in that DGN file.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what,
so, yeah. And I guess to kind of help before the trainings and stuff, to kind of help with this, think of a container. So a container file is a blank file. It's that there's nothing in it. The only thing that's in it are your references. The reason for that is you can reference those in, and then as a nested depth, your nested depth of 1 for that container file, as that's referenced across, that is then controls a one location to control my information that I need from levels being turned on and off, my level symbology. So that's my main file that shows up in my sheets. So think of this as just a blank file that has all of my model references that go along in it, my design base files that are in that file.
yeah, I think until we provide the training and record those sessions, and it's in your hand, guys, you're not, that will give you the full picture.
Yeah.
We're just trying to clean up referencing and nesting.
Yeah.
You know, will training be available
Yeah.
after the manual, or what's the schedule for your? I mean, I hear a lot of training talk. but
Yes.
When do we anticipate some of that will be coming out?
So we are starting with 2 roadway, 2 for all specialty group. One of them, this is the first one. There will be another one. There will be another 2 session for the roadway, and then as we're working on the task order, the next task order, we will add more training. And also 2024, once we roll out that customized training, it will cover all that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help? Okay. So you guys will have training. The thing is, I have the feeling we will tweak the content on this as we go through and try it and train. So that's just to come up with a final version of that manual. Unless we provide you the training and put it in your hand, we're not gonna get a good feedback. So we'll be doing that, working with you guys closely.
Any other questions on, I know we're getting close to the time here, but again, we'll definitely go over that more in depth and walk through how-to videos of what that means, how that works, because it affects on how things are printed, how things are developed from a PDF standpoint. Again, that'll be hit on at the end of June through the whole manual. I guess as far as clean files, this term has kind of been used differently through areas, but clean files, what's meant by that is, for an example, as you see down here, is if I have a file and I'm referencing information into it, making sure that it is referencing just the information that I need. And if that information is not needed or turned off, or I'm just referencing it here and there, I need to detach that information. My files need to be clean, contain only the data and information that is necessary for that file. Reason for that, Open Roads is a lot slower for folks if you have a file that is referenced and then another file that is referenced and another file that is referenced, or multiple files that are referenced. Even if it's not turned on, it still goes through the process of those files. It still goes through looking for those files. It is a very cumbersome process. The more clean your files are, the faster it's going to operate, the less crashes you're going to have, the less problems you're going to have with your files. Thus, going back to a working file for users, that's one of the reasons. If I want to have 15 different files as a working file, and to Stephen's point, that's not data dependent, that's the file I would reference in at the beginning of the day, detach at the end of the day. It's one file. It may seem like a lot of work, but it's going to save you so much time at the end if you do that. There are multiple times we run into project-wise issues. We run into files not being able to be open or files going corrupt. Most of the time for that reason is because the files are not clean. It's because there's other data and other files that are referenced to it that don't need to be there.
Yeah, I've seen on sometimes like the same file reference in multiple files that's referenced to that file, and that's sometimes cause crashes. So that's just a best practice. We go over it in the future.
And then we touch on the references and data references, and this kind of goes back to what Stephen was talking about as well, was if it's data dependent. So if I have a geometry file and I've created a corridor, my geometry is now data dependent to that corridor. I can't detach that. I break my corridor. Same thing from a storm standpoint. If I have my storm and it's connected to a surface or a corridor, I can't detach that because now it breaks. That's the data referencing, data dependent. Referencing just being, okay, I want to reference in a drainage file so that I can see what it's doing, but I'm not connecting anything to it. That's just my referencing. The data referencing means that it's going to be data dependent upon something else. You'll get an error if you try and detach that reference that says it is data dependent. Do you really want to do this? That's what that means. So that's really what this talks about. The use of the software, again, we get into why it matters, the geometry downfilled. We talk a lot about between roadway bridge, open rail. Again, what we were talking about before on what happens if I open an open bridge file in Open Roads, really looking at those things. We've also been working on how that process works with a bridge file and when it references roadway and what to do in that aspect, and if that becomes a problem and how that If that becomes a problem and the bridge breaks because the roadway moved or the geometry moved and nobody told bridge about it, that's an issue. So we have processes and workflows on how that works, and I know that one's in chapter 4. Working with Justin Spanier, I know that is heavily involved with the bridge group on those things. So really trying to make sure we're taking into account all the specialty groups and the needs and processes that you guys are looking for. And that's really what we want. A lot of great feedback on from survey folks on being able to get in files, control files, how files are distributed, those types of things. That's really kind of the feedback we need is, okay, how do we cater this so that survey is getting what they want, drainage is getting what they want, traffic, bridge, everybody's, environmental, everyone's getting what they want. That's the goal of this whole manual, is to provide something that's useful for everyone and helps you move forward with what we're doing, getting to aspects of digital design, digital delivery, and utilizing a lot of that even for what we do today for plans and specs, so that we're used to how those things work, how the data is managed, how it transfers, and how we move forward. With that, I got 1 minute left. Questions. I'll be on for a few minutes too if anyone has any questions, but
well, we have a meeting right after that.
Yeah. So does any questions or anything? There'll be a feedback thing from this, but I'm excited about this. I hope we're developing something for the state that is useful for you guys and is going to work well for you guys. That's our goal.
Well, thank you guys. I mean, we'll work together on it. Definitely, we're working closely with specialty group and you, and provide training and keep close working together to get that to the point you are happy with. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.